At first glance, Homeland Security and terrorism awareness may seem like issues best left to the purview of the government and law enforcement, and for the most part this assumption would be correct. Regardless, developing actionable intelligence involves sources which are developed from the ground up and are often ordinary citizens who find themselves observing and identifying many precursors to terrorist-related activity. Most often, citizens may not be able to perceive the full spectrum of potential terrorist activity, but they recognize their observations are matters that deserve scrutiny from trained professionals. In addition to this segment, please make sure that you review the attached Department of Homeland Security video on See Something, Say Something. In 2013, the then Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, coined a phrase, "Homeland Security begins with hometown security." She explained the job of securing our nation is a large one, and it requires us to enlist the talents and energies of people all across the United States. So what did she mean? People often believe the job of securing our nation lies exclusively with the government, our intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and the military. Napolitano clearly implied the government is essentially our lead resource for uncovering terrorism, but she established the fact that government must rely on all citizens to assist in these efforts. While the effort to enlist citizens in these tasks was not the original idea of Napolitano, she emphasized how the government needed to reach out and engage private sector partners and citizens who are often in the best position to be vigilant for suspicious activity. And those citizens play an essential role in uncovering potential terrorist activity. In our role as security professionals, we are on the front line of such efforts. We are often in the position of being able to first observe and detect signs of potential terrorism. The United States became keenly aware of terrorism on the morning of September 11, 2001, when the most devastating attack ever on our homeland unfolded. In reality, terrorism did not begin in the United States on 9/11. It had always been present ever since the inception of the country. President Thomas Jefferson, for example, sent U.S. Marines to battle the Barbary pirates in 1804, and one of the first efforts of our country to define and counter these acts of violence. International terrorism is defined by the FBI as violent criminal acts committed by individuals and/or groups who are inspired by or associated with designated foreign terrorist organizations or nations known as state-sponsored terrorism. The 9/11 attacks were quite expansive, using hijacked airliners targeting both towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and a third plane believed to be headed to the U.S. Capitol before crashing in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The attacks on 9/11 were planned almost 5 years in advance and perpetrated by Osama bin Laden and other members of a terrorist organization known as Al-Qaeda. While these attacks resulted in over 3,000 deaths in the United States, it is estimated that the cost to plan the attack was less than $500,000. This was actually the second attack on the actual World Trade Center, the first coming in 1993, but obviously nowhere near as devastating as in 2001. Other examples of persons already in the United States but inspired by foreign states or terrorist organizations include the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing by the Tsarnaev brothers, the Pulse nightclub attack in 2015, and the New Year's Day 2025 vehicle-borne attack in New Orleans, Louisiana on Bourbon Street. One interesting side note regarding previously classified information about the Pulse nightclub shooting, which resulted in 49 deaths and 53 casualties, were the actions of Omar Matan. Prior to arriving at Pulse that evening, he actually visited 2 other clubs in Orlando, but was dissuaded from actually attacking those locations due to the fortified and active security presence at both of these locations. The FBI classifies domestic terrorism as violent criminal acts committed by individuals or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. Claiming to be exacting revenge for the ATF raid on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, Timothy McVeigh and Reed Nichols were convicted in the deaths of 168 people after the 1995 bombing at the Muir Federal Building in Oklahoma City, the worst act of domestic terrorism committed by a U.S. citizen. This attack actually prompted many enhanced security practices at federal and civilian buildings across the United States. This includes vehicle parking in proximity to facilities, protection measures for first responders, and the necessity of emergency pre-planning. This incident and others provide the dreadful history of domestic or homegrown terrorism in the United States. Other examples of homegrown extremism include a violent intruder attack at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina in 2015, where 9 worshipers were shot by Dylan Roof, or 11 persons killed by Robert Bowers during morning services at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2018. This course will reflect upon detection and prevention of such incidents, with the hope of preempting them from occurring. One clear lesson extracted from 9/11 is an understanding that we were not sufficiently prepared and failed to observe or react to some of the precursors, warnings, and other suspicious factors which could have been investigated more thoroughly, perhaps with different results. The FBI, for example, was seen as an agency with excellent resources to react and investigate acts of terrorism, resulting in persons being brought to justice, but somewhat lacking in their ability to formulate intelligence about terrorism before it occurred. Now, hindsight is always 20/20, and it isn't to say that intelligence officials or others were not concerned or chose to overlook these indicators. Quite the contrary. The 9/11 Commission pointed out that a singular mindset and a silo mentality was prevalent among government agencies who guarded known information rather than share it collectively. Since 9/11, the government has attempted to break down these walls and demanded agencies work together and involve citizens to contribute to these efforts as well. The response to 9/11 by all levels of government resulted in a monumental shift in resources and the development of others. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security was created as a cabinet-level umbrella federal agency in response to the 9/11 terror attacks and set out to protect the United States against threats. Its wide-ranging duties included aviation security, border control, emergency response, and cybersecurity. Several existing agencies then fell under its guidance, including the FBI and U.S. Customs and Border Control, while still other departments were created to stand up for the nation's intelligence and safety efforts. Almost every state in the Union then created or expanded their versions of Homeland Security. In Delaware, this is the Department of Safety and Homeland Security. Heavily concentrated in these agencies are and were efforts to bolster intelligence by expanding federal efforts, but also with fusion centers created within the states where intelligence could be obtained, shared, and disseminated with the goal of detecting and preventing terrorism. The fusion center in Delaware is known as DIAC, Delaware Information and Analysis Center, a specific unit of the Delaware State Police. Among the most poignant changes or adaptations was government and law enforcement encouraging, educating, and enabling ordinary citizens in this effort to fight terrorism. A common theme established was the idea of if you see something, say something. Call it clever or cliché-ish, it was simple. When something is suspicious, report it. Even if you can't figure it out, let the right people know and let them attempt to do so, if there actually is anything to be figured out. Both local and state law enforcement have worked to develop relationships with whom they refer to as private sector partners, and especially those concentrated in what are defined as high-value targets. Targets simply mean venues or properties that terrorists may specifically select to commit an attack. High value means a target where, should such an attack take place, it would most likely have a resounding effect on the community and the nation. For example, a terrorist attack at Dover Speedway during a NASCAR event, or a mass shooting at a large shopping center. Targets are also defined in terms of being soft or more hardened. Some examples would be a shopping center, such as the Christiana Mall, where there are a number of different entrances and exits, and people can get in relatively easily and get out relatively easily. Other areas that are more hardened would be, for example, the Dover Speedway, where during events there is limited egress and ingress, and usually they are controlled with metal detectors and other devices. More hardened targets would be your pharmaceutical locations or your oil refinery that's in Delaware City. These have very controlled environments, and access to that is extremely limited. Security personnel work at all such locations and more in Delaware and across the nation. So when we say we're on the front lines, this is what it means, and this makes sense as security personnel truly are on the front lines of combating terrorism. You may recall the National Terrorism Advisory System created shortly after 9/11, a system designed to advise the nation of current levels of perceived threats. It was color-coded. Orange, for example, was high. Red was the severe level. This changed in 2011 and was updated to bulletins, which were efforts to share known intelligence with the public so they could be on guard or take measures to minimize vulnerabilities. Obviously, such information would not be classified, as making that known could jeopardize ongoing investigations. Regardless, law enforcement does make efforts to specifically partner with private sector partners where they can develop a high level of cooperative trust. For example, should intelligence be developed about a specific threat to a specific property, law enforcement can partner with the security and management personnel so the threat is managed and preventative actions can be taken. Immediately in the aftermath of 9/11, the nation was reeling and understandably scared. Would there be another attack coming? What would be next? Our government and businesses undertook many measures to enhance their security. The world changed on 9/11. Some of the rules changed as well. And worst of all, America could no longer assume its territory to be impenetrable. In addition to the creation of Homeland Security, legislation like the Patriot Act bolstered government resources, providing authorities with the ability to surveil persons, perhaps with greater latitude than originally envisioned in prior interpretations of the U.S. Constitution. Private sector stakeholders also began to assess their vulnerabilities, considering measures not frequently seen in our communities before, such as metal detectors at public venues, delivery inspections, restricted access, armed security guards, on and on. Much of this was understandable and defensible. Regardless, providing security to a free society, especially one such as the United States, is a difficult task. America values and guards its security, but also reveres its freedom. As security professionals, this dichotomy is often difficult to manage in proportion. Regardless of our apprehension, we must admit that while the country will never be completely terror-free, we have learned many valuable lessons, implemented many valuable safety measures, and understand the value of being prepared while being proactive. One can only guesstimate how many possible terror plots have been uncovered and stopped since 9/11. We may not actually know or even be able to estimate an actual number. but there are many, perhaps hundreds. And there has never been an attack on the scale of 9/11 since that fateful day, but certainly there have been other efforts. We need to conclude our actions have worked, and they work best when everyone is part of the solution. And security guards must see themselves in this position. And before you think terrorism is something that only happens in big places, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, think again. What you're looking at is an excerpt from the arrest warrant of a man who lived in Dover, Delaware in 2015. He operated kiosks in shopping malls in the mid-Atlantic states and was amassing funds to support ISIS. Here were his plans once he got enough money to do so. Thankfully, the FBI uncovered his plot well before it expanded. Terrorists can live amongst us quietly. Several of the 9/11 hijackers rented apartments within a few miles of where I grew up in northern New Jersey and stayed at motels I drove by every day. I never imagined I lived so close to such evil. We were scared 20 years ago, and for good reason. Today we must work to get beyond the fear and learn the lesson of being vigilant and prepared. So as we talk about preventing terrorism events or observing their precursors at our properties, what do we specifically mean? Let's take a look at the 7 signs of terrorism. The first would be surveillance. During initial stages of planning an attack, terrorists may record or monitor activities of their possible target in order to determine the target's strengths and weaknesses. This could include still video, cameras, homemade diagrams, notebooks, maps, blueprints, binoculars from a far distance, and other vision-enhancing devices. Elicitation. That's the process of seeking information. Suspected terrorists may attempt to gain information by telephone, mail, fax, or in person, emails. Special attention should be paid to those who make unusual inquiries about a specific critical infrastructure, a military installation, a event area, a shopping mall, so on and so forth, and a number of different areas that potentially could fall into this category. Or are they even approaching some of the security personnel that are on duty and asking them questions that seem somewhat innocuous? Or are they on a fact-finding mission? Are they counting your cameras? All these things that are matters that you should be keeping an eye on, and if they're occurring, you should be reporting them. Certainly to your management people, at least initially anyway. Testing security. Testing security is known as probing. The technique involves attempts to measure reaction and response time by security personnel. Terrorists may use time to gather information on a possible target by driving past and even penetrating sensitive or security areas to assess the response time of not only emergency responders like the police, but also the security personnel that might be present on the property. Acquiring supplies. Terrorists need to acquire various supplies and equipment by purchasing or stealing large amounts of explosives, weapons, ammunition. Acquiring supplies may also include obtaining law enforcement equipment and identification, such as military uniforms, flight passes, badges, manuals. Also, security personnel should be on guard for this as well, as a lot of times the items that they wear mirror what law enforcement might. They have uniforms, they have weapons, they have badges, all of those type of things. Although Delaware is predominantly an agricultural state, citizens do have to watch out for individuals making unusually large purchases, maybe such as fertilizer. This is definitely a pre-indicator. And just suspicious persons that are out of place. This can be somebody in a workplace, a building, a neighborhood, or a business who seems suspicious because of their behavior. The person may or may not have contact with other individuals. They may pay particular attention to and ask unusual questions. And the potential for somebody or a group to do a dry run, a trial run. This stage usually involves placing persons from a terrorist organization into various positions and moving them as if they were executing that plan without actually committing the actual terrorist attack. And then Lastly would be deploying assets. This is the stage where the players get into position to commit their terrorist activity, and during this stage terrorists may place people, equipment, and supplies at or near their target. This could be the last chance to notify authorities before that actual terrorist attack occurs. Seeing something and saying something. First off, common sense will tell us anything of an immediate nature, such as an event about to occur or overt activity. Do not hesitate and contact 911. Should you encounter these other matters we've discussed where something just doesn't seem right, but there is no exigent circumstance, consider contacting DIAC or utilizing the non-emergency contacts of your local police agency. Anything job-related should always be first reviewed with supervisors and management, as they may be able to provide additional context and even clarify what you might be observing. They also have a right to know anything and everything that goes on at their property levels. This is not the time to cry wolf or exacerbate details. You may naturally provide some conjecture, but remember to work within the framework of facts, as a true security professional would do. Violent intruder incidents can include firearms, which account for over 90% of such incidents overall, but also edged weapon knife attacks and vehicle-borne attacks. Violent intruder incidents are terrorist acts as well, regardless of the offender, their intention, or their motivations. While we need to be vigilant against all types of terror, violent intruders particularly stand out. And while they occur with varying frequencies, the rates remain historically high. For example, the first half of 2023 saw a record number of active shooter events in the United States. Some of the statistical information contained here is provided by the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center, otherwise known as ALERT, at Texas State University, and was created in 2002 to address the need for active shooter response training among first responders. In 2013, ALERT was named the national standard in active shooter response training by the FBI. The law enforcement response template created by ALERT is mandatory training for all Delaware sworn law enforcement officers. Please note the stats presented by ALERT are rolling data sets and as such change, so this limited information and percentages referenced will not be formulated into exam questions. The data is used for demonstrational purposes only. There is not an expansive amount of information we have about attackers beyond sex and the number of attackers associated with incidents. Attackers were male 96% of the time. Furthermore, the attacker commits the attack by him or herself 97% of the time. ALERT includes the racial ethnic makeup of attackers, roughly mirrored that of the general population. While the median age of attackers was 31 years old, attackers in their 20s were the most plentiful group compared to any other decade of life. This age trend of attackers adheres to the classic age crime curve observed for nearly every crime type, peaking in late adolescence and early adulthood, and then steadily declining throughout the rest of life's course. The answer of what we can do to prevent such horrific events is equally elusive. The themes we stress in this training section have been awareness and prevention. Often we wonder what could have been done to prevent the latest active or violent intruder incident. While most incidents appear random, we sometimes put some of the pieces together afterwards and see there were actually some warning signs. A study by the FBI in 2022 indicated in 81% of school shooting cases they reviewed, the offender told at least one person about the attack beforehand. In 59% of cases, at least two other individuals had some knowledge about the attack before it occurred. Even when indicators are present, the legal remedies available to prevent such acts are not widely utilized and require high thresholds of proof. And they are often temporary measures. They require specific persons to be petitioners. Even so, narrowly specific laws can only contain what they are designed to contain. While we cannot rely 100% on legal precautions, we can be vigilant, situationally aware, and understand the threats which may exist in our environments. Threats of terrorism, no matter what their origins, are possible on our environments. As security professionals, we need to be aware of potential threats within our environment. As the gatekeepers at our property, we often are the ones who have the opportunity to know and understand all types of information. We also have the unique ability to make those keen observations others might overlook. Yes, the rumors, innuendo, and gossip normally need to be dismissed, or at least examined in perspective. Being open-minded and wide-eyed is our best proactive approach. Being we are seen as protectors, people might feel more comfortable providing us with information, perhaps even see us in our job as the people that should know certain things. If someone is in distress, they may see you, the security professional, as someone who can shield them from harm. Think of someone with a PFA, which is known as a protection from abuse order against another individual. Most often, these are the results of a domestic incident, but not exclusively. The petitioner, the person who requested the PFA, has expressed a fear for their safety to a court and been granted some legal level of protection against a respondent, who is the person the PFA is against. Unfortunately, PFAs are difficult to enforce in areas where the public is invited, and PFAs are not always the result of an alleged or adjudicated criminal act. Regardless, they can be interpreted as warning signs. While most respondents generally abide by PFAs, or their violations are not violence-orientated, should a petitioner make it a point to make you aware of a PFA, you as the security professional need to take the matter seriously. As a security professional at a property, you may be made aware of employee terminations at the businesses on the property. Employee terminations often evoke serious emotional responses from the terminated employee. They may also alarm other employees in the business, and most likely the manager or person who had the task of terminating the employee as well. Did that employee make threats of retaliation? Does the employee still have access to the business? Did he or she have violent tendencies or psychological issues? Was that employee terminated for criminal reasons? While most of this information might be kept confidential, should you be made aware of it, that means it was a safety concern for all of those involved. Again, most terminated employees will not violently retaliate, but knowing established indicators may help you better understand and allow you to assess the incident entirely. Security professionals may find themselves working on properties with a variety of tenant mixes, if you will. Do you have a business or a tenant that has a practice of resulting in an unusual amount of customer complaints? Maybe that cell phone store that constantly is breaking customers' phones, or that store with the no return policy. Or perhaps there is potentially some controversial social aspect about a business on your property. Perhaps it's a place of worship, a military recruitment center, a medical facility. Or maybe there's issues or incidents that you hear about, customers that keep coming and returning to businesses where they're unhappy. Again, all of these matters are items that you should keep on your radar. What do you do when these indicators and predictors are present? First off, anything of an immediate nature would require you to involve law enforcement right away. But for the majority of these issues, they usually develop over time, so be proactive. Discuss what you have learned with others so they can be vigilant for the same indicators and predictors you're observing. Maybe then they can even add some context or clarification. This information should never be used as gossip or for personal enjoyment. Such matters should be confidential to the protectors who need to know such information. Be professional and discreet. Make sure supervisors and management personnel are aware for the same reasons. Depending on circumstances and often in coordination with management, it may be best to refer such information to the authorities eventually, as they are the ones able to investigate and better understand if there is a potential threat. Lastly, do your job as a protector. Be vigilant. Pay special attention to that tenant who has concerns or that employee who feels unsafe. Oftentimes, just the idea that a professional is watching may be sufficient to dissuade an offender. Remember our example of the Post nightclub. The offender was dissuaded twice before he acted. What if he observed the same security environment on his third try?